I have a dog, and my dog's name is Buck, but Buck ain't an ordinary dog. What you have to understand about Buck is that his mother was a German Shepherd, but his father was a prolific and extremely determined Basset Hound. I didn't really believe it myself till one night I saw a Basset Hound running through the neighborhood with a stepladder tied to his back. But while Buck inherited his mother's good looks, he got his daddy's legs on the bargain, so he looks just like a German Shepherd that swallowed a kayak. He's about a dog and a half long, but he's only about a half a dog tall. But what that dog lacks in good looks, he makes up for in nasal prowess. When it comes to smelling things, that dog is sort of a canine savant. I can hold down the plate of eggs I had for breakfast, that dog will sniff them, run out to the hen house, and find me the chicken that laid them. One time I let him smell one of those spicy chicken wings. Half an hour later, he was back in my living room with a bottle of Tabasco and a buffalo. You've probably heard that story about the princess that sleeps on the 12 mattresses and she finds the one with the pee on it. Well, that's nothing. I guarantee you that even if you had 12,000 mattresses, it would take Buck less than a minute to find the one with the princess's pee on it. And that's a vegetable joke, in case you were offended. So I knew with a nose like that that dog was bound to be the greatest hunting dog that ever lived. And the only thing keeping Buck from being a great hunting dog was the fact that he was gun shy. Every time a gun would go off, he'd run and hide somewhere. So I knew I had to cure him of that. And at first I tried all sorts of passive ways. He and I would sit up all night long reading Field and Stream articles to each other. Then we'd fall asleep watching hunting videos on the VCR, but none of that was working. So I decided I was going to have to take more drastic measures, and here's what I did. Now, this would have been April, about 10 years ago. We were thick in the middle of a cold spell. It was 14 degrees outside. I had the day off work. Buck Dog was sound asleep in front of the fireplace. I took a piece of cardboard, drew a target on it, and I laid that on the compost pile in the backyard. I went inside, got my trusty 30-30 rifle, and one bullet. I woke up Buck Dog. I took a rope. I tied one end to his collar. I took the other end and tied that to my belt loop. We went outside. I held that bullet down there where Buck Dog could see it. He looked it over, sniffed it a couple of times, and when he was ready, he gave me a nod. Well, I loaded that bullet up in my rifle, took aim on that target, and blammo, I fired. Well, now, as per usual, I had failed to consider the full ramifications of my actions. And I can't tell you exactly what Buck was thinking, but as near as I can figure, he thought he was supposed to track that bullet. Because no sooner did that bullet leave the end of my gun than Buck Dog was after it. And I don't mean he was running after it, I mean he was flying after it, chasing that bullet through thin air. And when he got to the end of that rope, tied from his collar to my belt loop, that rope snapped tight, pulled me out of my boots, I dropped my rifle, and I was flying right behind him. Well, Buck Dog chased that bullet right through the hole in the middle of that piece of cardboard. Then he drugged me head first through that pile of compost. Now, I don't know if you know what it feels like to be drugged head first through a pile of comp. Well, you've been living under the same administration I have for the last 2 years. But that bullet left that compost pile, went flying off into the woods, and every time it ricocheted off a rock or glanced off a tree, Buck Dog was there. As we were going through the woods, a big old branch reached out and just tore my shirt and jacket right off me. Well, Buck Dog followed that bullet all the way down to the railroad tracks. Now, that would be Weirton's world-famous steel fashioned into CS&X railroad tracks, running clear from Cowan to Grafton via Burnsville, Buckhannon, Carrollton, and Philippi. And it just so happened that at that very moment, a 6-engine, 168-car CS&X monster train, loaded down with 19,364 tons of pure West Virginia bituminous coal, was rolling by, and that bullet slammed right into the side of one of those coal cars. Well, when Buck saw that, well, the buck stopped there. But I passed the buck. I went flying right by him, and when I did, that rope tied from his collar to my belt loop snapped tight one more time, and this time it just ripped my blue jeans right off me. When I hit the side of that train, I was screaming, partly out of fear, but mostly because, like I say, it's 14 degrees outside. Suddenly I wasn't wearing nothing but my boxer shorts. Now, because I was screaming, my tongue was sticking out of my mouth. And because my tongue was sticking out of my mouth, it was the first thing to hit the side of that train. Now, I don't know if you've ever touched your tongue to a piece of cold metal in the dead of winter before, but I suddenly found myself frozen solid to the side of that train. I had my feet under me. I was kind of running alongside the train like this. Ah! But it was cold and I was barefoot. Pretty soon I lost my balance, and when I did, my feet sort of flew out behind me. My right arm was flapping in the wind. I had my left hand on my boxer shorts because, well, it occurred to me there are a lot worse things than my tongue to have froze to the side of that train. And there's no way to clean that one up. But that train was making about 20 miles an hour. My mouth was wide open. The wind was blowing right in, taking all the saliva, washing it around my uvula, out my mouth, over my cheek, across my shoulder, and down my arm, until before I knew what was happening, there was a 50-foot wing of frozen drool sticking perpendicular from the right side of that train. Well, that train topped a hill and started down. We started going 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. And I guess the lift and the drag and the rest of that aeronautico mumbo-jumbo must have been just right, because all of a sudden, that train lifted off. If there'd been anybody with me, they'd have certainly called us the Wrong Brothers. But now, I had never flown before, so I thought I'd see what I could do. And I took that train straight up, stalled out those engines, went into an inverted dive, pulled out of that into a loop-de-loo, and then I wrote my wife's name in the smoke real pretty, because I've always been romantic like that. But then I started to get just a little bit nervous, because I figured the police were going to be wondering what I was doing flying that train around the sky. I mean, I didn't have a pilot's license. I didn't even have an engineer's license. So I figured the smartest thing I could do would be to take that train back in. Well, I straightened her out. I reconnoitered the tracks beneath me, and I headed in. But I got about 5 feet above those tracks, I started to get nervous again. Because like I say, I'd never flown before. I'd certainly never landed a train before. And the one I was about to land only had one wing, and the one wing it did have was iced over. But I just started saying to myself, I think I can. I think I can. I laid that train down just as pretty as you please. Right away, I went to feeling proud. And I think you probably all know what the good book says about pride. Pride cometh before the fall. And folks, this is where the real trouble started. Because you see, I looked up just in time to see that train was going into a tunnel. And that tunnel was built just wide enough for that train. And I was sticking out just far enough to the right side that my head collided directly with the rock face of that mountain. Well, I came to a sudden and violent stop. That ice wing shattered off, but that train was still going, and my tongue was still frozen solid to the side of it. I could feel my tongue getting pulled further and further out of my mouth. I could see that train slowing down under the strain. And I knew one of two things was bound to happen. Either that train was going to stop, or my tongue was going to get jerked right out of my mouth. And that's when I said, something hath got to give. Well, just then I heard a tremendous snap, and my tongue, now stretched 40 feet long, tore itself free of the side of that train and came tearing down that tunnel like a giant rubber band bent for fury, and just slingshotted me and it straight up into the sky. Well, by this time it was raining and snowing and sleeting pretty good, so it didn't take long for an 8-ton snowball to freeze solid on the tip of my 40-foot tongue. So there we were, the 8-ton snowball, the 40-foot tongue, and me in my boxer shorts. Well, pretty soon gravity caught up to us and we started heading down. It was kind of like parachuting, but it was kind of like having a hippopotamus for your parachute. We were headed straight for the ground at a pretty good clip when I noticed some power lines beneath me. I managed to wiggle and twist myself just right. I dropped right in between those power lines, and just before I hit the ground, that 8-ton snowball on the tip of my 40-foot tongue hung up on those power lines and caught me. I was just sort of hanging there. Little old Jaybird came and landed on my head. He and I were just looking around, waiting for someone to come and get me down, or spring to come and thaw out my tongue. But it was while I was looking around that I happened to notice a black bear coming out of his cave. Now, he was lean and hungry after a long winter's hibernation, and I could tell he was looking for something to eat. And when he looked up and saw me in my boxer shorts with that jaybird on my head hanging from those power lines, well, that bear just smiled. Near as I can figure, he thought we were some sort of R-rated piñata sent straight from heaven. And that bear reached into the hollow of a tree and pulled out an aluminum ladder and a baseball bat. I tell you what, that surprised me too. He set that ladder up underneath me and he commenced to climbing, and he did not stop until he got to that top step. That one that says, clear as day, do not stand here, you might lose your balance. He took that baseball bat, took a couple of practice swings, and just as he was coming around to deliver his death blow, I heard a rustling in the underbrush. Looked up just in time to see Buck Dog. Y'all remember Buck Dog? Buck Dog came charging out of the underbrush. Of course, on his short little legs, it's more like overbrush. But he quickly assessed the situation, and out of a deep sense of loyalty, Buck Dog bound up that ladder, and he bit that bear right on the backside. Well, when Buck bit that bear, it knocked that bear off balance. He dropped that bat, started rocking back and forth on top of that ladder, and just before he fell, he grabbed a hold of my ankles. Now, when that bear grabbed hold of my ankles with Buck biting his behind and him on the aluminum ladder and me with the 40-foot tongue and the 8-ton snowball sitting on the power lines, well, that completed a 70,000-volt circuit that none of us had anticipated. The resulting explosion passed down my tongue, blew all the feathers off that jaybird, passed through me, blew the fur off that bear, blew the hair off Buck, and blew us all straight up into the sky one more time. So there we were. Let me recap for you, just in case you missed anything. There's the 8-ton snowball, the 40-foot tongue, that naked jaybird. I was now as naked as that jaybird. And then there was the buck naked bear and the bear naked buck. All of us were streaking through the night sky like a comet. Now, eventually, everything got back to normal. We landed, the snowball melted, my tongue shrank, the bird got his feathers back, I got some clothes back, Buck got his fur back, the bear got his hair back. And if there's anything at all I learned from this situation, and it seems like the sort of thing I should have learned something from, I guess maybe sometimes it is best to just let sleeping dogs lie.